God bless you all. This is your victory. It is the victory of the cause of freedom in every land. In all our long history, we have never seen a greater day than this. Everyone, man or woman, has done their best. These, of course, were the immortal words of our then Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, on VE Day 75 years ago on the 8th of June 1945. So may I thank you once again for joining me live in the Barn Theatre. And of course, it would be wrong of me not to pay a very great tribute to everybody involved in the Barn Theatre and to David Fowles, everybody who's helped make these series of shows such a success. I would like to, again, thank, as I say, the Barn. Could we have... What's happening? We haven't got an autocue. Yeah, but it's not the right place.
There we go, Geoffrey, it's on.
Right, sorry. I hope you're finding this information informative. Please do keep in touch with your questions and comments. We value them very much. So on VE Day, I received an email this week from a constituent who's had a long career in the RAF, serving this country. He said that in times of great challenge, it is important to support one another. This difficult period we are living through has really shown the importance of working together, helping in the community, and perseverance. It seems fitting that as we begin to look towards returning to normality after this unprecedented couple of months, we today commemorate and celebrate VE Day. As I said in the opening, 75 years ago, on the 8th of May 1945, we celebrated victory in Europe after almost 6 years of war. Britain and its allies formally accepted Nazi Germany's surrender. The speech that I've just quoted from the then Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill, was given at precisely 3 o'clock to announce that Germany had surrendered and that the long war in Europe had finally come to an end. It is a somber day as we remember all those who died, the sacrifice of 384,000 British soldiers, along with hundreds of thousands of men and women who died while serving in Commonwealth and Allied forces. I realise that many of us are not able to commemorate this day in the usual way, but I have published on my website a list of the various events that are going ahead today, which I hope many of you are able to participate in, or at least watch, and I will be joining a commemoration in my own village a little later on today. Of course, we must also look towards Victory in Japan Day, the so-called VJ Day, on the 2nd of September, which I hope we'll be able to commemorate without such strict lockdown rules. And you can find the programme on my website, www.cliftonbrown.co.uk. I, of course, would like to send my deepest sympathies to all those who have lost loved ones throughout this COVID period, particularly in the last week. And I hope that they will be well remembered, and I sympathise with all their families. Last week, the Prime Minister announced that we had reached the peak of the virus, and this Sunday at 7 o'clock, we expect him to make another statement on the route out of this lockdown. Today is our education session to find out how teachers and students have been getting on through this very difficult period. And I now hand over to David Fowles to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey. We're delighted to welcome to the panel Jim Grant, who's the principal of Cirencester College, Mr. John Sanderson, who's the principal of Chipping Campden School Academy, Mr. Rob Jones, head of Wrencombe College, Mr. Barry Jackson, who is the founder and director of Aspire Academy, and last but by no means least, Mrs. Jo Woolley, who is the head of St Mary's Primary, Tetbury. We were discussing how it would be possible to let children back to school and students back to college, and what effect has the virus had on educational establishments and businesses in the Cotswolds. And we are keen to hear from the panel what their experiences are, and how youngsters have been studying from home, and how the colleges have been educating children, teaching the class remotely, and the success of online sessions. The government unveiled measures to ensure vulnerable and disadvantaged young people can continue to access vital education resources from their homes, providing laptops and tablets to children with a social worker and disadvantaged young people who are taking exams next year, so they can continue to access essential services and resources. 4G routers will also be provided to disadvantaged secondary school pupils and care leavers, so that they can get online and can continue their studies. The Oak National Academy was launched to provide children with online lessons every week. The brand new enterprise has been created by 40 teachers from some of the leading schools across England, backed by government grant funding. Testing and tracing. I think I'd like to hand back to Geoffrey to deal with that.
On the testing and tracing, the government has announced it will be investing $388 million for research to discover new vaccines, tests, treatments, and as a part of a larger $744 million aid commitment to help end the pandemic and support the global economy. Mobile COVID-19 testing site has been set up in the county. A new drive-through mobile testing unit, MTU, for coronavirus has been launched this week in Gloucestershire. A full list of who is eligible to attend here can be found on the government site, www.gov.uk/guidance/corona. And we urgently need to reach a place where testing is available to anyone who's working in a care setting who wants to take a test. The government have launched a pilot of the NHS contract tracing app in the Isle of Wight, which will play a crucial role in our plan to test, track, and trace on the mass scale we need across the country. The app has already been tested in closed conditions on an RAF base, and the privacy and security of users' data is a priority, and experts from the National Cyber Security Centre have advised on the best practice through the app's development. Economic support and emergency measures, including business grants, tax deferrals, and the job retention scheme, are already helping hundreds of thousands of small businesses weather the impact of the coronavirus. Dairy farmers have been suffering, and I have helped them get a hardship grant, much needed support. They have been facing financial pressure due to excess milk, falling prices, and reduced demand from the hospitality sector. The government has announced this week a new hardship fund for those dairy farmers to claim up to £10,000 or 70% of their lost income during April and May. A fuller announcement will be in the link in the description of this programme. It's also announced the Bounce Back Loan Scheme launched last weekend. It enables small businesses who can borrow up to £50,000 and access the cash within days. These loans are easy to apply for with just 7 questions on the form, and they are 100% government-backed and will be interest-free for 12 months. 69,000 bounce-back loans worth £2 billion were paid out during the first 24 hours of the scheme, and there is a link in the description of this programme afterwards. Postponing business rates revaluation in 2021 will help uncertainty for many firms impacted by the impacts of coronavirus. Legislation has been introduced in the next revaluation to bring it forward from 22 to 21, again helping businesses. This will give them more certainty during this difficult time and so that they can survive. And an extra £76 million has been made available to support survivors of domestic abuse, sexual violence, and modern slavery, as well as ensuring vulnerable children, vulnerable young adults can continue to get the help they need. Over 1 million food boxes have now been delivered to people who are most at risk from the virus, ensuring that the most vulnerable in society have all the support they need to get through this epidemic. And I pay tribute to all those who have helped preparing and delivering these boxes. In terms of green waste, as I said in last week's session, I have been contacted by a high number of constituents who wanted the green waste collection scheme to be restarted, and I'm delighted to know that it will be starting in the very near future. I've also been pressing hard the Gloucestershire County Council to reopen their recycling centres for household rubbish, and I'm glad too that that timetable has been announced. These two are completely separate services, and under no account should green waste be taken to household recycling centres, as this could overwhelm the service. During such a difficult time, I know many of you have gardens and have found great enjoyment and comfort from tending them, and this service reopening should help. Now today we have a galaxy of talent from the education sector, and I thank them for taking the time to come and discuss how we can get our schools back as lockdown restrictions are eased. They've all had tremendous experience, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this important topic in more detail with them today. This not only informs all of us, the audience and myself, and therefore we are able to feed this in to government policy, and that is the really usefulness of these shows. Thank you all for listening today.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey, and powerful words from Winston Churchill, and we look forward to hearing what our Prime Minister today will tell us on Sunday about easing the lockdown. Just quickly, at your suggestion, I'm going to outline the rest of the session. We're going to show three very quick videos now that were pre-recorded today to give you, the viewers, and indeed our panel, a flavour of what youngsters are going through. We have an interview with a 12-year-old and sharing his experiences, interview with an 18-year-old who can't sit her A-levels, and lastly, two undergraduates. And then we're going to go to the the question time style format where Sir Geoffrey will continue his role as Fiona Bruce and will interview the panel. And then if there's time, because we're always told that on the live stream that you want to have a chance to ask Sir Geoffrey questions, if there's time at the end, we'll take questions. And then last but by no means least, there are 2 videos. Our report from the North, by Councillor Nigel Moore, who will be updating us live on issues to do with the Household Recycling Centre. He's giving us a report of the minute that we took earlier today. And Councillor Richard Norris, which is from Tetbury, who's going to tell us about his experiences within the sports and leisure sector. And although there's no opportunity to introduce Councillor Richard Norris, I was asked to say that Councillor Norris has spent a lot of time over the last 9 years teaching youngsters from 3 to 16. It's a passion of his. He believes in equal equality and equal opportunity for youngsters, and it's great to see a passionate district councillor doing his job. So that's right at the end. So without further ado, let's show these 3 videos, and it's straight back to you, Sir Geoffrey, to do the question time session. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Now, at the Barn Theatre today, we've got Tyrese and his father, Ben Jones, and we thought it would be useful for our audience to learn from a young 12-year-old exactly what his experiences have been like not being able to go to school during this whole coronavirus period. So welcome, Tyrese. Great to have you here in the studio, and thanks for agreeing to do this. Tell us, what's it been like not going to school?
It's been quite hard. I haven't been able to see my friends, and it's hard juggling my work around at home.
But obviously your life has been completely different because your whole day is spent at home. What's that been like? Has anybody been able to set you any schoolwork, or tell us all about that?
We get set our schoolwork on an app called Show My Homework, which lets us easily access all of the schoolwork we would have been doing if we weren't in the current coronavirus lockdown.
And is that hard, or and have you got a variety of subjects? Just tell our audience who don't perhaps know how that app works, what it's like.
Well, it's quite easy to use, and it's easy to get a hang of using it. You just have to scroll through it and go on the work, and then you send it to your teacher, and then they'll set a grade or a mark on it.
And how long does that whole process take? If you do your work today on that app, you send it off to your teacher today, do you send it off that day? And then how long will it take to get it back, a comment from your teacher?
Well, they'll have to read through all of the class's work first, and then they'll go through who they read first, and then they'll mark that, so it can take a few days before you get your grade or mark.
So it's not just not being able to see your friends at school, you're not able to participate in any sports or any activities of any kind that you would normally do at school. Has that been hard?
It has been quite hard, yes. But I can find the same things to do at home because I do have some of the equipment I'd use.
So tell us about that. When you say the things that you would normally do, what sort of equipment does that mean?
Well, we have a cricket bat that I like using to play cricket because I like playing cricket with my friends when we're in normal circumstances. And we have a lot of space for me to run around, so I don't have to go outside to do it. I can just do it in my garden.
So do you find is your day fairly full, or are you getting bored? Is it hard? Tell us about that.
It is quite hard. It is really full of stuff to do. I have to try and help around the house, but I also have to do my schoolwork as well.
So do you have a fairly set routine? Do you get up at a certain time or go to bed at a certain time and have your meals at a certain time?
Well, it is sometimes I do. On the weekdays I do, but on the weekends I don't.
Of course, you've got to have some time off.
Yeah.
Got to have some leisure. And do you feel that you are getting behind with your work? Despite all this great effort of you and your teachers, do you find that you're getting behind with your work, or do you think that you're about where you would be if you'd been at school?
I am getting a bit behind on my work, and I know a few of my friends who are as well, because there is one problem with the app. Sometimes it won't submit the work, and then it won't submit it for the whole time. So I've got pieces of work that it won't submit to my teachers, so they think I haven't done it, but I've had to tell them that it won't go through, and I've had to send them evidence of it.
So presumably, I don't know how the app works, but can you submit it at a different time? Is this due to your broadband signal, or is that why it's not going through, or what?
I think it must be because we do live in quite a rural area, so we don't. In big urban cities, obviously, you get better Wi-Fi and connection, but in where I live, we don't. It's not so good.
So part of the problem about not seeing your friends, the other side of that coin, is you don't get that sort of competitive edge, whether it be in your work in the classroom or in your sports or cultural activities. Is that a problem? And are you talking to your friends? Do you do anything with your friends online?
I do still talk to my friends. This morning I was messaging my friend Millie from school, and last night I messaged some of my friends, and I keep in contact with them over the phone as well, so I call them sometimes.
And are you looking forward to going back to school?
Yes, I am.
And have you any idea, what in your own mind, I mean, you probably followed the debate, because you're very interested in politics, I know. What do you think about the timetable for returning to school? Do you think you should be very quickly, or do you think that actually we should pay heed because the virus is so dangerous that we should be very cautious about getting you back?
I think we should be cautious, and I think it should be a gradual process, such as sending a year group in at a time.
And have you any suggestions as to which year group? Should it be little ones or older children who are about to take their GCSEs and A-levels who must be really suffering?
I think that the older children should be sent in first, because it's more of their lives that are going to be affected, because they've got exams they need to finish. And
well, thank you very much, Tyrese. It's been great to have you here, and good luck with everything. And I hope it's not done any permanent damage to your education. Thank you, and thank your father, Ben, for bringing you in here today and agreeing to do this interview. It's been really great for our audience to hear from a youngster like you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Sabrina. Thanks very much for agreeing to come onto the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. We're here at the bar and you're at home, sadly.
Yeah, all social distancing.
Good. Tell us what it's like being at home as opposed to being at school.
Well, it's very different. I've never had this much time on my hands in a long, long time, but it's been a nice change, I guess. I think it's been a fantastic opportunity to rediscover some passions and hobbies that we haven't been able to do in a long, long time. I've had a big pile of books that I've been waiting to read for many, many months now that I've finally got into. Been enjoying nature, been doing some online courses that I wanted to do for a while. It's been very nice to rediscover passions that I haven't had time to do in a while, really. But it's very different.
So tell us, you're in the middle of studying for your A-levels. Have you been able to do, obviously you can do your work at home online and with the books that you've got, but have you been able to do any sort of interactive work with your teachers?
Well, because since exams have been cancelled, there hasn't been much, we've stopped studying the subjects, we're not doing classes anymore, but there's been interaction in terms of different opportunities you can get going with. There's been interaction with different online courses you can get involved with, or different reading recommendations, but in terms of actual studying specific courses, we haven't been doing that, no.
So I gather that you are at Cotswold School. You're obviously studying for your A-levels, but you had a prediction of doing pretty well in your A-levels, and now there's a problem with the grades. Would you like to tell our audience what the dilemma is that you're facing?
Well, for me, when Boris announced that these exams were cancelled, the initial reaction was, relief, because, these exams are a very stressful period for many students. But then upon reflection, suddenly started sinking in that, 13 years of hard work, the culmination of secondary school, the chance to prove yourself in these exams. So that's what it is for many students, a chance to prove yourself, a chance to bring all that hard work and put it into an exam and really go for it, and then feel at the end that you've deserved the grade you got. That's kind of been taken away from us now. And I think that can't be underestimated, because it just feels like we haven't really got the grades we might be given. And then it also has implications as well. Like, personally, I feel like there's lots of uncertainty surrounding how the grades will be actually distributed. I know they've said, well, hopefully people will get the grades they deserve, but I think that's quite hard. There's lots of discrepancies with how that's going to happen. So I think lots of students are a bit worried. I know a couple of my friends who are actually still revising because they are worried that they might not get the grades they need for university in August, and so are planning to retake a couple of subjects in the autumn.
So just explain to our audience who may not be as involved with this as obviously you are, how the grade awarding is going to work. And then I understand from a personal satisfaction point of view, you'd be very disappointed if you didn't get the grades that you should have done. But on the other hand, I also understand that the universities are going to be much more tolerant as to what grades they will accept.
Yeah, well, basically, the plan, insofar as I know, is the teachers are basically going to take it class by class, subject by subject, and they are going to award a certain number of A stars, A's, B's, C's, in accordance with previous year statistics. And as well as doing that, they're also going to grade each grade in terms of strength. So who do you think was most likely to get the A star or the A? And basically that's going to be sent off to the exam boards, and they're going to kind of do that nationally, statistically, and try and even it all out. So that's the plan. However, I don't know how that's going to take into account, like, maybe if this year is slightly better performing than previous years or recent result trajectories. I don't really know how that's going to work. But we can only hope for the best and see what happens, really.
Let's look on the bright side and tell us what A-levels you're studying and which university you'd really, given them what you'd really like, where the university you'd like to get to.
Yeah, I was studying chemistry, maths, English literature and physics. And my hope is to go to Warwick University to study PPE in September, all going well. And yeah, really excited for a new chapter. I think it'll be very interesting. And yeah, the A-levels perhaps don't marry up quickly to PPE, but that's really what I want to do. So very exciting.
So finally, Sabrina, it's been great to talk to you. With your PPE, are you intending to join us in the House of Commons one day?
Perhaps you'll see me there soon. Maybe that's the plan.
Well done. Let's see how we can all help you. Great to talk to you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you, Tyrese. We can tell that we've got 4 head teachers on our panel, because I've been told live stream by them that they'd really like to contribute to the response to these youngsters' comments. And before I hand back to Sir Geoffrey, I'd just like to read out one reply. Great to listen to children and to ask how COVID-19 is affecting them and to listen to their troubles. As a country, there hasn't been enough of listening to them and being seen to listen to them. Children must wonder if it is okay to ask some of the questions they have, since they've been little of this children's voice. Well done. Sir Geoffrey, for listening to the suggestion and implementing it. So we're going to listen to the undergraduates after the question time session, but really I know that the head teachers are champing at the bit to talk to Fiona Bruce, so I'm going to hand over to you, Sir Geoffrey. Okay?
Well, having been warmed up by those 2 excellent contributions, I really thought they were fantastic. How lucky we are in this country to have such bright, articulate youngsters out there. So without any further ado, hopefully our panel are on Zoom out there. There they are. So let's just start very briefly introducing yourselves. Jim Grant, just introduce yourself very briefly, please.
Okay, so I'm Jim Grant. I'm principal of Cirencester College. We're the largest sixth form provider in Gloucestershire, serving most of the county.
Fantastic, thank you. And we then go to John Sanderson in the north of the county.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Sanderson. I'm principal of Chipping Camden School. It's a standalone academy of serving students 11 to 18 years old in the north of the Cotswolds.
Thank you, Jim. And then we go to Rob Jones. Rob Jones, headmaster at Renkham. Are you hearing us, Rob? Well, we might have a technical problem there. We'll come back to you, Rob, hopefully. And then finally, we then go to a primary school teacher, Mrs. Jo Woolley.
Hello, yes, I'm Jo Woolley, and I'm the head teacher of St Mary's Primary School in Tetbury, which is a primary school with just over 350 children in it, from 4 to 11.
Very welcome, Jo, if I may call it that.
Thank you.
And then finally, Barry Jackson. Barry, are you hearing us?
I'm hearing you loud and clear, Sir Geoffrey. Yes, I'm very much the odd one out in this panel because I don't work in the education system, but I run a business which is really all about offering careers advice to young people, helping them to develop strategies that will get their careers off to a flying start.
You're by no means the odd one out. You're a very important part of the cog in youngsters' education to get them to where they want to be in life. Rob, do we have you back again? No, clearly not. Sadly not. Okay, well, we'll proceed with the four of us, and somebody will tell me when Rob comes back. So the first question I really want to hear from all four of you, I think, we'll start in reverse order, is what your experience has been during this terrible COVID period, and how you're planning when the lockdown is finally released to run your individual institutions. So perhaps we start with you, Barry, and then move on to our headmistresses and headmasters.
Yeah, well, I mean, from a very personal point of view, I haven't been affected nearly as much as a lot of people because I'm a professional coach. I can do coaching sessions online. I don't know whether you can tell from my appearance, but I'm actually 72. I could have retired several years ago, but I'm on a kind of a mission now to help young people. So I'm able to finance my business when money is not coming in. I'm in the unusual position of being able to finance the continuation of my business from equity that I built up when I was working in corporate management. So I have been comparatively unaffected by it from a purely personal point of view. But of course, what I have had the opportunity to do, particularly through the Cotswold Collective, of which I'm very proud to be a member, by the way, is to develop collaborative partnerships with like-minded business people, and to put together projects to help young people, to encourage them to take part in innovative projects and things like that during the lockdown. And we have been delighted by the response we have had from schools such as the ones who are represented by the other panelists today.
Barry, thank you. That is fantastic. So, Joe, you're the headmistress of a primary school. Lots of primary school children out there. Are they suffering? Are they getting bored out of their minds, or are you able to interact with them in some way, giving them some teaching online?
Yes, we have an online platform that we already had. We used for homework, actually. In fact, we've got two online platforms, one for reception children, the 4 and 5-year-olds, and one for the other children. So the families were actually quite familiar with using that platform because we've been using it before. So that was what we used. We brought it in across the school. The teachers have been working incredibly hard, I have to say, and I'm saying that for all teachers in Gloucestershire. They have not been on holiday. They have been working their socks off, planning lessons, preparing activities, and assessing the work that the children then respond with. And it takes an awful lot of time for the teachers to do that. So, I appreciate it's very difficult for everybody at the moment, but teachers have been working hard to do this. The teachers in my school have managed to provide activities, often differentiated as well, because obviously we have children who may be, 9 years old, but they're working at very different levels. So it's very important that the teachers are putting resources onto the platform that all children can access. So that takes, quite a lot of work, but the children have managed to access the work. The parents have been absolutely amazing. I have to say, our St Mary's parents have been working alongside their children, doing some fantastic activities at home. And there's been huge enthusiasm from the majority of the families in posting these wonderful activities, some of them, the work that the teachers have put, but other things as well that they've been doing, like baking and sports that they've been doing in their gardens, dances, artwork, got work, all sorts of things. And we've been using the platform as well to signpost families to all the different resources that are out there. There are so many companies and the government as well that are providing websites for parents to go to. So there is absolutely no shortage of activities, learning opportunities for children online. I mean, obviously it has its challenges. No system is perfect. We understand that. And I think some of the parents have had difficulty uploading work. The teachers have found it quite challenging responding to every post because they get so much back. But generally, I think, nothing is going to be as good as being in a classroom.
No, so Joe,
yeah.
we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I want to bring Rob Jones, who's joined us again online now. But Joe, a really important question before I let you go on this section. Are our youngsters, I mean, these early years interventions in teaching are so important. Do you think there are going to be some who are going to be permanently damaged by this period, or do you think, as a professional teacher, you will be able to catch it all up later?
I think that schools will do a very good job at catching up with children, yes. I mean, bear in mind, we've had an Easter holiday in the middle of all of this. So actually, when you count up the days that children have missed, it's not enormous. It's not great. We don't want children to miss school, obviously, and there's nothing we want more than to see the children back in school. But our curriculum is a very spiral curriculum. Children revisit learning all the way through primary years. So I am confident that the work that they haven't covered, we will be able to go over again, and we'll be able to really embed that learning once they get back into school.
Well done. So I now want to bring in Rob Jones. Rob, would you like to just briefly introduce yourself, and then perhaps couple that with the question that I've been asking the others, is what your experience has been in your institution during this corona period and how you're planning for the future?
Of course, well, apologies for disappearing right at the key moment. My name's Rob Jones. Obviously, I'm head of Renton College. We're 3 to 18, so right the way through the age range. We're an independent day and boarding school just outside of Cirencester. So for us, very much echoing really a number of the things that the fellow panelists have said about some of the problems. At our junior end, we've managed to put on something similar to what Joe was talking about there with regards to various activities and that communication with parents. It's absolutely key, though, trying to get that balance right. And also, I think, really communicating with the children is the other aspect to it, and making sure that they understand that it is difficult for them, and we understand that. And you get the expectations right there. So there's been a combination of activities and also sort of face-to-face Zoom sort of type teaching like we're doing today, online today. With the senior pupils, it's been slightly different because, of course, their ability to sit in front of a screen is perhaps rather easier. But again, even that has to be managed. Up until now, I've been talking to the pupils about not sitting in front of their screens, not being on their phones and getting outside and doing all those other things. And here we are now in an environment where we need them to sit there. So we've been setting a target of them being in front of their screen to have some face-to-face with their teachers for about 20 minutes and then send them away to do something completely that's related to the subject, but not actually requires them to be sat at their screen. And it's really interesting, the aspect of that with regards to their own well-being, really, is something that we felt really quite strongly about. And then, of course, the other thing that I think it should be said is, like our other panelists today, we've been open right through the Easter holidays because, of course, we've all got key worker pupils as well. So it's like running 2 schools at the moment. You've got the one school with these youngsters actually in school, and it's a very, very strange situation for them to try and cope with. And then you've got the youngsters online and trying to keep that communication with the pupils, with the parents, and indeed with the staff. One thing that we've done, which has worked quite well, is we've done fairly regularly, we've done just very, very short surveys just to touch base and just literally say, how are you doing? How are you getting on? And that seems to have worked so far, but it's really difficult for them. I think it's just, understanding that it's not the same and they're not expected to work to the same pace because they can't. Simple as that.
Rob, thank you. I'm going to bring John Sanderson in. Now, John, you're the principal of one of our major academies in Chipping Campden. We've heard from Sabrina earlier on. You've got youngsters who are at a critical stage with their GCSEs and A-levels. How have they been coping, and what have you been doing in your teaching staff to help them?
Yeah, I think just reflecting what Sabrina had to say, really, we went through, like every secondary school did, of the experience of having to bring our young people in. It's in the news the night before that schools were closing and that examinations were going to be moved over to grading in centre, and that was quite a shock to the system, really, and also associated with schools are learning communities, and therefore associated with any school is not just the sense that one's doing one's exams, but there's a whole series of rituals and processes one goes through, because as Sabrina, you've been in schools for 7 years, many students, and it's part of very much part of the centre of your community. In terms of those young people that are in year 11 or year 13 and therefore would have been sitting their exams, in fact their exams would have been starting in next week, that's been a process that's been trialled through the government with their different forms of assessment, and we'll be doing like everybody else. We'll be setting a series of centre assessed grades. We'll be doing that by going over the assessments that students have been taking for the vast majority of the 2 years that they've been studying their particular courses. And at our particular school, we do 3 sets of mock exams, so we've got a very robust system of examinations already. Examination data already there, and ongoing class assessments. Teachers, as Sabrina suggested, will then come out with the most likely grade for that student based on the assessments they've done. And then students will be ranked within those grades. As Sabrina was spot on, it's those that were most likely and the highest within that grade boundary, and those ranked down towards the lowest of those grade boundary. And then the school will send off its centre assessed grades, and we will have no more to do with them, because the next phase is a statistical standardisation, and that will be a check against the student's prior attainment. So, to caricature it, if a student had a fairly low Key Stage 2 grade, and then we're suddenly predicting or suggesting the most likely grade is a very, very high GCSE grade, then one might question why that journey's been so significant. Of course, in some cases, it can be significant. There can be all sorts of reasons for a particular grade at GCSE compared to a particular grade at Key Stage 2, and vice versa. And also, there's an element of the prior attainment of the school, or the history of the school in the kind of achievements that the school normally delivers for its students. And I think that's quite right and proper, because many of the schools in Gloucestershire are very, very high performing schools, and Chipping Campden School is one of them. I think the greater challenge then, moving into those young people that we're working with online, and others have expressed how we're doing that, and Tyrese mentioned exactly the same. We have the same system of Show My Homework, we have a virtual learning platform, etc., etc. But obviously there's those young people in year 10 and in year 12 who are anticipating will be sitting exams this time next year, and of course there's a growing sense amongst them that the quality of teaching, and particularly feedback, I think that's the one thing. You can set work, but all the data and research shows us that the most powerful thing that helps young people learn is the quality of the feedback that they get. And of course, there's a reason why, as teachers, we train for years and do degrees in the subject, so we can give high quality feedback in the specific specialisms that we have.
Thank you.
And I think many of our students are missing that kind of quality feedback, and we would like to get them back in school as soon as possible.
Of course, that's going to be the next question. How do we prepare for bringing them all back? But before that, Jim Grant, you cover a range of pupils' ages. How have you been coping? What work have you been able to set them? And I'm particularly thinking about your apprentice programs, where there is an element normally of on-the-job experience, which of course hasn't been able to take place. So how have your pupils been coping?
Okay, so I'll try not to repeat everything everybody's said so far, but I think like everybody, probably most people in the world, the speed of this took us by surprise, being catapulted into a world where suddenly you're going to be delivering education in distance learning, which, to be perfectly honest, we're not set up for. I mean, most of our courses had got materials online in our kind of repository, which is called Moodle, but it wasn't our main way of delivering courses. So that's meant that, as with other schools and colleges, teaching staff had to make a tremendous effort, first of all, to create resources, and in terms of A-level and BTEC and so forth, there aren't a lot of things online immediately to hand. So they have to get those together, and then experimenting with teaching online using Microsoft Teams and other kind of platforms It really has been a very experimental phase. College itself, we tried to stay open for vulnerable students and students, frontline staff, but actually people didn't want to come into college for that. So it's kind of in hibernation. Everything's been done remotely. As you mentioned, apprenticeships. I mean, the bigger problem, I think, with apprenticeships is that our staff who would normally support them can't get into them in the workplace because of social distancing rules. So that's a problem, although, again, we're trying to support them as best we can remotely. I think the exams John went through, I won't go through it again, but clearly that's been a new experience for teachers, particularly when you think some of the cohorts they're having to rank are 300, 400 students, spread over sort of, well, in the case of GCSEs, retake sometimes spread just between 2 or 3 grades. So that's quite a challenge for people. Our tutor staff, pastoral staff, they've all been trying to support students online. All the students who are vulnerable, all the students who we've got educational care and health plans, they're always all contacted every week to make sure they're okay. And there's a lot of work going into trying to support Sabrina's cohort, the year 13s, who've finished the work they're doing, but we really want to try and keep them busy, keep them motivated and keep them thinking ahead. Our support staff, I mean, some of them have been working harder than ever to keep the whole show on the road, the IT staff, estates and so forth. But quite a lot of our staff are volunteering or making PPE for frontline staff. My job's kind of very weird in this situation. It's a little bit like a video game fantasy college because I don't get to see people. And I think John touched on this. I think in education, for the age groups we're dealing with, this is very, very much a second best. What students need, 16, 17, 18 years that we have, they need a teacher in the classroom, they need to be with their peers, and they need to be able to discuss things. And it's not just about what goes on in the classroom they're learning, it's all the things outside. So they're missing. So kind of issues. Students, 17, 18-year-olds, some of them have struggled with routines. Connectivity, big issue. In some cases that's to do with household access, but it's also to do with broadband in rural areas, which don't necessarily support streaming video. We've got a lot of anxious students, both those who would have taken exams, and I think they also feel bereft because they haven't really properly finished. We had a lot of students in tears on the last day because they were just suddenly torn away from their friends in the college. Isolation, I think, is an issue, both for staff and students. And as John mentioned, the year 12s, the first year sixth formers, also getting concerned that they may get behind. And we've got particular issues, I think, about, we don't know how next year's exams are going to run. And where you've got, we have students from, over 100 different secondary schools. Some of them are coming from strong schools where they've done well. Some are coming from schools that maybe aren't very strong. And there's a danger that the students get labelled to some extent by their experience prior to 16. So that's a big concern for us. But I think the other thing I would say is that everybody so far is safe, and we've done 6 weeks this. I mean, we heard at the start of your program, people have just done 6 years of it. So, it is difficult, but we've got reasons to be grateful as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to this issue of vulnerable children and children on the ECHPs and children with mental health problems. But before that, let's be optimistic and let's think about how we cope, because I'm sure we're going to need to for a long time with social distancing, how we can begin to get our schools, and Barry, how you will offer your programs for when schools are able, maybe gradually, maybe by certain groups at a time. I'd like to hear all of your thinking on that subject. How we're going to cope with easing the lockdown in the future. Perhaps we start with you, Barry.
Yeah, I think that one of the issues I would like to bring into the discussion is another concern that a lot of young people have. A question that is often fired at me by young people is, how are we going to get into the job market when all this is done? they see a situation where there is probably, at least for a while, going to be raised unemployment. I think that is almost certain to happen. It's nobody's fault, but I think it's something they're going to be faced with. And a question I often get asked by young people is, how are we, new people to the job market with no experience at all, going to how can we compete with older people who've perhaps been made redundant, who've got 20, 30 year experience? How are we ever going to break in? And I think one of the most important messages that I like to share with young people is that whenever there is a crisis, it is people who can approach that situation with fresh minds, with an innovative mindset. They are the people who are going to bring this country out of that situation and get the economy really rolling again. So people who are innovative have a real role to play here in getting the country back to a thriving situation when all this is over. And young people have that kind of mindset. I mean, just from my own personal experience, I graduated back when the world was, when the earth was still cooling. And, I have seen immense changes. And I remember when the internet came along, for example, that all of a sudden there were things like mobile phones, there were emails, all sorts of things that would have been science fiction when I was at university. And I felt a little bit like an animal that had been born on the land and whose environment was now swamped with water, and I had to learn how to swim.
Barry, I think
I was very acutely aware, Sir Geoffrey, that
I think we've all had to learn.
I had all these years' experience, but a lot of it was irrelevant, and there were young people coming in with far less experience, but much more relevant experience. And I think young people can look to that as a positive, yes, and take great heart from that. And that's certainly one of the messages I would like to be sharing in schools when this is over.
Thank you very much. Joe, you're going to be planning for the future. You've got youngsters coming back, very young sometimes, who may not understand the gravity of all of this. How are you going to begin to get them back and operate social distancing and try and instill in them the importance of doing so?
Yes, I mean, that's a big question. I don't know is the answer. We have thought about it, obviously. I mean, there's nothing we want more, all of us, I should imagine, than to see children back in school. That's what we absolutely, I said to my parents this week, I want to be able to stand on the field and watch them all playing together again. But we have to put the priority has to be the health and the well-being of the staff and the children in the school. So we have to, I'm hoping that the government will produce guidelines that we can follow. Social distancing in a primary school is a very, very difficult thing to do. I mean, we've been running as a school for key worker children and for vulnerable pupils. And I've been in school most mornings during the lockdown, and children are still running around. 4-year-olds are still chasing each other and grabbing hold of each other and rolling around. It's very difficult to stop them. We are spending money on PPE for our teachers and our staff. So we will do what we can to protect the adults in the school. But I think phased return is the way forward. We have a school of 350 children. I don't have a spare classroom in my school. There are no spare spaces, and there are up to 30 children and 2 adults in every room. So if we have all 350 children and all 50 staff in the school all at the same time, we won't be able to adhere to social distancing. It won't be possible. If we have one year group in for part or different year groups in for parts of the week, then we can spread children out across classrooms and put them into groups of about 10. But when they go out to play, what do we do then about and I think, you know, there's still many questions from parents about how safe would the children be. I have many questions about staff who have vulnerable family members at home, and, you know, are they going to be taking anything back to those people? We also have issues about if all the settings don't open. So if preschools don't open, I have a lot of staff who have preschool children. Who's going to look after their children so that they can come to work? There's a lot of unknowns. We will do our best to get the children back into school, but it's going to be a challenge.
Thank you, Jo. Now, Rob, you have a real challenge because you not only have a very large age group, you have some who are boarding or have been boarding, not that they will in the future, in the near future anyway, and some who are day. I mean, what have you given any thought as to how you're going to get people slowly back as well as observing social distancing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is so difficult because not quite sure, obviously, how, you know, what it's going to look like with regards to year groups coming back and that sort of thing. So obviously we do have to wait for those plans to come through, and when they do come through, they'll be very well received. For us, of course, we've got borders in about 8 different time zones as well. So to one extent, that remote learning has been absolutely key for us in terms of making sure that those people stay connected to their tutors and so on and so forth. I never thought I'd have my own YouTube channel or I'd be putting up my own assemblies, for example. It's a bit of a new experience for me. But it's that sense of community, even though we're all far flung. I think with regards to the future and pupils coming back, yes, we are blessed with you know, a lot of space here at Wrencombe. But even so, trying to work out how to actually keep everybody safe with one-way systems and keeping pupils in certain classrooms. That's just with the senior pupils. The junior pupils are going to be a really interesting one. But I think there are some positive takeaways from this. I mean, I've got 2 teenagers at home, and one thing that has really impressed me is actually how they work. And it's quite interesting as we as, shall we say, adults of a certain age, we think of computers and online working in one way. I think that they see it completely different. I've quite regularly gone and see my daughter, who is got the phone switched on, chatting to her friends while working on something with them, and is genuinely working, but she's still keeping that sort of sense of community because she's got two devices on the go. That's how they behave. And I think that with our international pupils, I think this is what we're going to be faced with some there, some here, and trying to do you know, a combination of real life teaching and remote learning is going to be a bit of a challenge, but we're up for it. And I think what's lovely about all of this is that, again, the teachers, the business support staff, all the team, there's shown such great innovation over the last few months. And, you know, again, with parents and pupils, finding solutions to difficult challenges has become second nature for everybody. I think that's just a really positive message. We've just got to keep going forward with that, really.
And it's very interesting that you and Barry have mentioned new innovative ways of working with the new online technology that none of us have used before. And thank goodness we've got it through this coronavirus. Otherwise, we would have been in an even more difficult situation, I think. So, John, in terms, you've got lots of pupils. They get bussed in the morning and bussed out. I mean, you must have huge problems thinking about how you're going to get your school back to work and observe social distancing.
Yes, I think like my colleagues, you know, the teaching profession, I think that sense of innovation and resilience comes through, and I would certainly pay tribute to the families and the parents and carers of the children at the school, who have been relentless, really, in supporting the young people as best they can. I think many realising what a challenging job it can be to juggle house, home. Many of them in very challenging financial circumstances, or certainly suddenly changing financial circumstances. And of course, trying to continue to support, encourage young people with online learning. In terms of opening the school up, I would certainly echo my colleagues' perspectives in this needs to be phased. I think it takes a while for a large organisation to adjust to ways of working, and we certainly have to do a lot of online training and video training to train the teachers how to use some of the technology, because, you know, if you'd have asked us 7 weeks ago about Microsoft Teams, we'd looked at each other and wonder what on earth you were talking about. Now life is on Microsoft Teams. But yes, I think one of the things for our more rural and remote schools is, of course, most of our communities live a distance from the school. And while myself and my senior team are starting to and have been working through a whole series of scenarios about what a phased return might look like and how we might maintain some kind of social distancing, we've been looking at shortening and simplifying the timetable. X year groups in or Y year groups in. How will we manage those? Could we manage that by having some in and some working remotely? What happens to all those year groups that aren't in, or all those groups of students that aren't in? How do we continue to support those vulnerable and those with EHCPs who need that regular adult contact that a school provides? And do we do all that social distancing and put all those things in place and then say to them, off you go onto a bus, all 72 of you, and off you go, sat next to each other on a bus. So working through some of those logistics is going to be really quite important. We rise to the challenge, we always do. But some of them are still unknowns, and we're certainly looking forward to some general guidance from the Prime Minister on Sunday. It gives us a direction of travel, I think, and a pathway that we can all follow as schools and institutions together. But how that works out in each individual context will be quite a challenge. But we will find a way, and it's really, really important to our communities that we continue to innovate and find ways to do learning that's as effective as we possibly can. I think the great worry, like in most cases, is the great unknown. It's not knowing quite what can and what can't be done.
And you've also mentioned education and health care plans. I want to come back to people's mental health, that may be the last section. But before we do that, Jim, you run a very similar large institution with lots of different age groups, with lots of pupils being bussed in each day. What thoughts have you got for the future?
Well, I think I'd probably echo all the things my colleagues have said here. We've got something like 1,500 students come in by coach or bus every day. How's that going to work? We're trying to tap into the ingenuity of the staff team by saying, right, if anyone's, let us have your ideas about how it might work and problems we need to solve. We've got, I think, 7 or 8 different scenarios of how we might start to bring people back when we bring them back. I guess there's a number of questions that are really important questions that would enable us to plan. One of them, which I guess is a difficult one, is how long. If we knew, let's say, that this was going to carry on to some extent right through the autumn, I think, it would be important for us to invest now, both in kit and in training both the staff and students, because it's for the long term. If it's like for a few weeks, that's less pressing. You can kind of manage that. So that's a big question. I think social distancing, obviously, we haven't got any space. We've got two refectories that are very crowded. That's going to be an issue. I think there was some talk of hot desking being a bad thing on the news the other night. But of course, schools and colleges are hot desk environments by their very nature. And indeed, a desk, a flat surface, is actually relatively easy to wipe clean. Computers, kit, door handles, all those sort of things are much more difficult. And so for us, things like having access to cleaning supplies, having access to cleaners, all those sort of things, that's the sort of thing we're looking at the moment. We've talked about PPE, but we're very reluctant to try and stockpile it because at the moment, obviously, the NHS and care services need it. So the last thing I think the country wants is us trying to sort of get loads for an indefinite period for ourselves. But clearly, that's something we need to think about. And even if people come back with masks, there's questions already been raised about, well, how will that work for students or staff who've got hearing impairments who kind of rely on lip reading, and if that's all they're going to see, how will they cope? I think we've also got to probably expect that. I've got, I think, 10-11% of the teachers currently are in the shielding category, so they might not be able to come back in at all. So what will happen with their classes, and will they be online rather than in college? So that's another question.
Jim, I'm going to stop you there, if I may, because time is moving on, and I've got one other category I would like you all to address. I am really concerned about children and pupils that have got, in one way or another, learning difficulties or mental health problems, education, care and health plans. What monitoring have you been able to do, and how have you been able to help these children? Do you think there are some, hopefully a very small number of children and pupils out there that are really suffering during this period, or not? Jim?
It's a difficult one to say broadly. I mean, we know exactly how many students we've got at educational health and care plans, and they're contacted every week by the team that supports them. And we've got about 200 students that we're monitoring because they're at risk, either seriously at risk or moderately in terms of mental health, and they're being contacted by the pastoral team every week. So every week they get a phone call checking up on them, and they've got access to. We've got a lot of pastoral materials and kind of stuff to encourage resilience and looking after yourself available for students. Whether it actually is doing the job, that's the concern. I mean, they can have a phone call with the counsellor, but that's not the same as a one-to-one meeting. So yeah, I think we've all got concerns about that, and obviously if this became a long-term issue, I think those concerns would be more serious.
Is there anything more we should be doing through any of the agencies than we are doing?
Oh, that is a difficult one. I mean,
not any immediate ideas? No.
You caught me there.
Okay. Rob, I don't know, in terms of your school, how many of such children and pupils you have on ECHP plans, that sort of thing, vulnerable children and pupils?
Yeah, no, we do, and we certainly have unfortunately our share of pupils with mental health issues as well, and well-being is a massive part of all schooling, really, and I think that's something that has been sort of shone very much a sort of key light on what actually schools do in terms of that sort of looking after pupils. It's so much more than what goes on in the classroom. So yeah, I mean, again, I think it really echoes sort of Jim's points. I mean, we do the same thing. We do all we can with regards to phone calls and Teams one-to-ones and so forth. I've got an absolutely fantastic SEN department who actually, fortunately, we're already genned up with regards to using Teams. So they got on the case very, very early, and actually they've done a lot of training with my staff about the problems that pupils with learning needs, also how they find the extra complications of learning remotely and scaffolding lessons and so forth to make it easier for them. So there's been again a sort of real sort of working together with regards to that. But the well-being issue and making sure that you are still connected into those families and those pupils is a tricky one. As I say, I've mentioned things like surveys, but you just don't know what the interaction of the pupil is going to be, whether they're going to fill it out. If they do fill it out, is that really the case? So I think the key thing there is to make sure that you find the right members of staff who can have those trusted conversations with the pupils, as they've always done, and really keep trying to find a way through. And I think that then does prove to at least help enormously.
So, Joe, you've got a lot of little youngsters. How are they faring? Are there some in there who are suffering, do you think?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we do have some very vulnerable young children in our school. We have opened up the school provision for those children. So where we have concerns, particularly with children who have EHCPs, they've been attending school, a few of those, to keep the structure and the routine going and the familiar faces. And I have to say their one-to-one teaching assistants have been amazing at going into school and being the face at the door when they arrive, because they need that reassurance. The teachers have been fabulous at keeping in touch with the vulnerable children, and we do have a very strong pastoral team in the school, and they have been making phone calls, sending emails. We work closely with social care. MASH, the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, have been in touch with us. So actually the communication between multi-agency workers has continued during this period. But I do have to say that without the primary school being open, with the primary school being closed and not having the parents coming in on a daily basis, it's very difficult for us to monitor those children that we do have concerns about. We can tell when they walk in with their mums in the morning whether it's been a good morning or not, just by seeing them. And in being a primary school, they are in and out of our school all the time. So we have a very close relationship with the parents of the young children. And yes, we do miss seeing them and having that connection with them every day.
Is there any way, have you been able to issue sort of special invitations to those vulnerable children to at least come into school, maybe even 1 or 2 days a week, just so you can see them, see that they're all right?
Absolutely, yes. And we've had other contact with parents, like giving out food parcels, and we've been doing packed lunches. So parents have been coming to school to collect free school meals. We have been round to people's houses to deliver things. So we have had face-to-face contact with families, and that's been actually quite reassuring to see them and to check that they're okay and to see that the children are still smiling. I think one of the other issues that we've had as well is where perhaps families aren't together and you've got children living with mum but not seeing dad, and that kind of transition between two homes is it's critical for children to still have that contact with both parents. And that's been tricky for some families as well. But we've done absolutely everything we can to try and support them and to keep them buoyant during this period. But I think there will be a few casualties. And I think for us, trying to get some of our more vulnerable children back into school is going to be a challenge, because they will have been at home for so long that then, you know, how it is with young children, they do find that transition into school sometimes quite tricky. And I think that will be a challenge for some of our children to make that transition from being at home to being back in school again.
Well, thank you and your teachers for all that caring help. John, you've got a lot of children. Adolescents have lots of problems, and they've got the pressure of their exams and not happening. What do you find? And you mentioned yourself in an earlier question, ECHPs. What have you been doing for your vulnerable pupils?
Yes, I think that's one of the strengths of the teaching profession is that a lot of information gets shared. It's worked very well centrally, that head teachers have been sharing information. Again, working closely with social care as well. There's been regular daily updates through briefings. So I think you probably struggle to find different ways of working in different schools. We're all, phoning and contacting parents, checking up. Again, a fabulous inclusion department within Chipping Campden School that are busy contacting parents. Parenting is a difficult job on any given day, but given the social isolation and the challenge of trying to help a young person learn online, sometimes from a set of instructions that maybe they don't understand, different levels of literacy associated with that. So sometimes it's just been reassuring parents, often just saying to parents, it's okay if they can't do this or that, just get them doing something, keep the routines, keep them connected to the school. We don't have the opportunity really, given such a large catchment, to go around visiting, but where that's been necessary, we have made some face-to-face through social distancing maintained, but some face-to-face catch-ups. We've got phone-in counselling and Zoom counselling as well. But all those mechanisms are kind of, are very much a poor substitute really for seeing young people walk through the door. A couple of weeks ago, we invited our young people to contact their tutor, and we had an online tutoring. Those that wanted to contact their tutor, because in a secondary school, you're much more likely, the parents don't come to the gate, but the first person that sees them every day is their tutor. So that contact with their tutor is vital. But I do remain concerned that it's been a long time that we've had had face-to-face and personal contact with our more vulnerable students. We have had the school open all the way through Easter and everything else, like everybody else, for our most vulnerable. I guess I was a little bit surprised just how few have been able to access that, despite the transport being there. And I'm sure there's a whole host of reasons why that is. But going forward, and reflecting Jim's comment, really, I think the biggest challenge is not knowing how long. It's one of those unknowns. Are we dealing with this for another 3, 4, 5 weeks? Are we going to deal with this for another 3, 4, 5 months? And the response that any school or learning community can make becomes very different the longer it goes. So yeah, we're fortunate to have a very, very strong pastoral team. But we are conscious that we can't know everything that's going on in every different context that might benefit from some support or input from either ourselves at the school or from social care or a wider support network.
John, thank you. Barry, I mean, you're clearly not at the front line of any of this, but have you any thought on this, vulnerable children and pupils?
I'm not in the front line in the sense that the other 4 panellists are, and certainly they will have a much better appreciation than I do as to what the different types of vulnerable children look like. But as an independent career advisor, I do regard it as one of my responsibilities to collect as much information as I possibly can on how the job market is moving, and that includes job opportunities which will suit young people who perhaps have a learning ability that restricts their academic potential, but not necessarily their potential to work. And there are lots of opportunities out there, even in spite of the coronavirus. There are lots of opportunities for young people who are not necessarily very academic. And at the other end of the scale, I have met a lot of young people who have perhaps relatively mild forms of autism, Asperger's, conditions like that, who are incredibly innovative. I was talking to a student recently at a school in Worcestershire who was extremely innovative in spite of being an Asperger's child.
Yes. I'm sorry to cut you off. We are beginning to run out of time. I'm told this section of the programme we've got to bring to a close. So may I extend my thanks to all 5 of you. I think this has been a fascinating session. I hope perhaps we might get you back in a future occasion. But thank you very much. And what I'm going to do is hand back to David, because what he'll be able to tell you about is some of the comments that we've had online while you've all been speaking. David.
Thank you. And thank you to all 5 of our panellists. Nigel Shute has just said on live stream, great that all 5 of the panel have taken the time on their bank holiday to do this. So from us and from viewers, we'd like to thank the panel for taking the time out. A comment here from Bryony Smith. She said it's a shame that we weren't able to talk about severe or profoundly affected children, and it would have been nice to have had someone on who has more expertise in that area. Bryony, we didn't exclude them. It's just there's just so much you can do in a lockdown situation, and we were very, very lucky to get hold of.
We might come back to that.
But I think we might come back to that. So that's a very, very useful comment. Can't go without commenting on Cressida Landis, who said these teachers are all amazing. They care so much, and it's a real message for the government to know how much effort they are putting into all these young people. And I'm sure we'd all want to echo that. You are all amazing. And that includes you, Barry, even though you're not a teacher. And replying to Cressy's comment, such a burden of responsibility on all of you to look after the next generation. But I think the last word needs to go to Sabrina and Tylese. Tylese is described as a very rounded young man, and what a fantastic ambassador he is for his school, and that Sabrina has got a huge amount of energy and talent, and one of the viewers is wishing her every success in her A-levels and university. So fantastic session. Thank you very much to all 5 panellists.
So I'm going to have the last word on this. May I thank our panellists very, very much indeed. Clearly the care and the hard work that you're all putting into your schools and why they are so successful comes through in what you've all said. So thank you very much. I echo what one of our online listeners has said. You know, to come in on a bank holiday has been really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Okay. One of our online contributors said that didn't feel that we should deal with questions as an also-ran. He feels it's important that these sessions are opportunities to ask you, Sir Geoffrey, 1 or 2 questions. These are just ones that have come in. Some of them relate to education, but some of them more broad brush than that. That's the nature of these sessions, you making yourself available for, I think we worked out it's 12 hours that you've been responding to questions, and so thank you on behalf of all of us for doing that. And when we finish this session, we're going to listen to the students, the undergraduates, about their feelings on coronavirus. So the first question is to do with the easing of restrictions, and want to make sure that you would address the issue of the saddlery and equestrian industry, because it says that recreational riding, which is related to health and education can be achieved while social distancing. And this is from Nicholas Mason, who really wants to feel that we can get horse and riding back up and running, because it helps the horse as well as the rider to make sure that things are going. And he's also concerned that people who are in the equestrian industry on a broader level, such as saddlerers, are suffering as a result of this. So I think you've been taking that up directly with Mr. Mason, haven't you, on equestrian issues?
So, Nick, great question. I did 3 interviews yesterday on the whole subject of how we might begin on a step-by-step basis to get out of lockdown. And I think one of the areas where we could start to ease things is in the whole business of non-contact sports and leisure. And I instanced golf, but I think actually equally equestrian sports, particularly where people are keeping that social distancing, I think is one of the areas we should think about. And I'm very grateful for the question, and I will certainly take that back.
Okay, another more topical question. I knew someone would do this. We've had some fairly topical questions. It's again from Cressida Landlist. She says, do you feel that the resignation of Professor Ferguson this week, because he had flouted his own advice to the whole country on procedure during lockdown, will make it harder going forward for the government to enforce lockdown? The theme of her question is, why should people listen to advisors who then flout the system themselves? And, you know, getting advice from people who really should look to themselves before looking at us. We as a nation have tried to adhere to the guidelines, but there are people in authority who, frankly, are abusing that. I don't know if you've got a view on Professor Ferguson's.
I don't want to go into the individual of Professor Ferguson, but the government has set the guidelines down. And I would urge everybody strongly, whether they are top scientists or whoever, to adhere to those guidelines. I think the government, we are very lucky in this country. We've got a welter of very talented scientists, very talented medics, and I'm sure the government will have no shortage of advice.
Okay, thank you. I'm not whipping through these, but we have got 7 or 8 questions, and I think it's fair to do justice to all of them quickly. This is a question about the Nimsfield Recycling Centre reopening. There is a piece from Councillor Nigel Moore which gives details of the reopening of the Household Recreation Centre, so I'd like to thank Robin Levin for his question.
Can I just briefly comment on that?
Yes, by all means.
The County Council are doing a trial on a site in Gloucester and a site in Cheltenham next week on an appointment-only basis to make sure they don't get swamped with people. I think shortly after that, they will be then turning their attention to your recycling centre and the one, of course, at Foss Cross up here for the college.
I think I listened to I interviewed Nigel earlier, and he said he hoped that would be reopened on the 18th. Yes. So it's imminent. But you made the point about green waste and not taking it up there. Next question is specific. It's not really related to coronavirus, other than it's an issue to do with environment. Concerns from Councillor James Bainbridge, who's the Vice Chairman of Barrington Parish Council, about the pollution in the River Windrush with raw sewage that overflows from its sewage works in Bourton-on-the-Water and elsewhere on the river, and it's causing extreme damage to the environment, which is probably more apparent now because we're seeing such clean air and things in other places. I'm thinking that perhaps you ought to be taking that up directly with Councillor Bainbridge on behalf of Barrington Parish Council, but there's a particular
James,
problem.
If I may call you that, you may be aware that from my large FRUD meeting a month or 2 ago, this issue was raised full square. It is an issue that I've been talking to a number of Cotswold constituents about, and in particular trying to prompt Thames Water and the Environment Agency into action. I think there are a number of places in this constituency on the Windrush, the Colne and other rivers where the discharges are unacceptable, and I will keep pursuing that matter.
Okay, thank you. The next question is related to, it's from Rosemary Andrews. She's commenting on last week's question time where she said it's all well and good to have virtual surgeries, but if people are elderly and sight and hearing difficulties, that's going to be difficult for them particularly, and also with young people. So going to a virtual surgery is fine for certain categories, but not fine for everybody. I'm sure you'd agree with that. Yeah.
Well, I would try and make myself available to anybody in any way they wish to contact me. If there are elderly people or vulnerable people out there that can't contact me in line, either through this virtual surgery or direct at my email, cliftonbrown@parliament.uk, I'm more than happy, through social distancing, to come and see them. I saw somebody like that the other day and found out her problems and managed to help her with them. So I'm happy to help any constituent. If they can't get in touch with me themselves, perhaps others who are helping them or looking after them could get in touch on their behalf, and I will certainly do my best to help them.
Okay, and that also extends to the medical profession as well with virtual surgeries. Next question, very quick one on recycling centres. We've already answered that. Penultimate one, it's from Margaret Hing, something that you and I were talking about and you've commented on with dairy farmers. Why do we treat our farmers so badly? We are now being told that gallons of milk are being discarded because it cannot be collected and demand is down. In addition, the farmers are being offered less money because it costs more to produce the milk. I paid £1.10 for 4 pints of milk this week. It would cost more than that to buy bottled water. Crazy. I think you're addressing that, and I think you've got...
And we have. I mean, yeah. Margaret, and we have, and that's why under a lot of pressure from members of Parliament like myself, but others who've got dairy farmer constituents, that's why we've got this hardship scheme this week. And I'm sure for those farmers who were in the liquid milk sector serving the hospitality sector, who are particularly badly hit, they will get this hardship payment, and I'm hoping that's going to enable them to stay in business.
Great. From Ali in Fairford, we answered one of her questions last week. This one is about staggering children and getting them back to school. I think we addressed that in the question time. Could you somehow get children back on a phased basis? The next question is, where can over 65s get coronavirus tests? I think that's published online. Don't know if you've got anything you'd like to say about being not that you are over 65, but where can you get a coronavirus test in the district?
There is a wealth of advice online. We will make sure that it is on our website as well. At the moment, we are concentrating on getting the tests for all of those frontline workers in the health service and everybody in the care sector, both workers and residents where they need it. That's really important. Once we've got that under control, then I think we'll be able to roll out the testing more generally for the rest of the population.
Okay, that's thank you for that. Her last question related...
Having said that, of course, those that are admitted to hospital are automatically tested before they're admitted. So there are some of the most serious non-frontline people in the country who are being tested, but I take the point. We need to roll out the testing and tracing to a lot more people in this country if we're going to actually beat this disease.
Okay. One more question from Ali. It's, can you help investigate aviation fuel dumping on fields, etc., around Fairford? Because obviously there are military planes coming over, and it has been a historic problem with fuel being dumped, and I think it's probably more acute now because you know, people are just more aware of it, but there is an ongoing problem there. I don't know if you've had that in your mailbox, fuel dumping.
So Ali, I haven't had the actual dumping as a problem. I've had the smell as a problem, and although I haven't publicised it, I did have a big online meeting with all of the very top people from the top commander of the American forces in this country online the other day. We produced a note of that meeting, which I can let you have if I've got your details. As a result of that online conversation, I have been invited to visit them at Fairford once this whole coronavirus lockdown is over, and I will certainly raise that issue again when I go and see them.
And I'll send Ali's details to you, Sir Geoffrey. I'm just going to go to the online streaming, if I may, because clearly Bryony Smith has a very detailed knowledge and issue to do with the severe and profoundly affected children, and I think we should be in touch with her outside this meeting, and your idea about maybe exploring that in more detail. But she says, will the government release guidelines for SEN schools at the same as mainstream? I don't know if you could...
Well, I think it's a very important point, and I am very concerned about vulnerable children and making sure they're getting the help that they need. So I'd be delighted to hear from...
Okay, we'll follow that up with you, Bryony. If you want to let us have your contact details. The downside of live streaming is all we've got is your name, but if you could email us, let us know your email address, I'll pass that on to Sir Geoffrey.
Thank you, Bryony.
Last but by no means least, to end on a positive and high note from Stephen Moore, can we remodel our ways of living to include shared community larders, moving away from billions of unnecessary car journeys and trips to the shops? This is a theme of yours, which is we're going to learn some really powerful lessons from what's happening out there at the moment. It isn't all doom and gloom. You know, it's a beautiful part of the world that we live in, and we've got some really wonderful initiatives that hopefully will carry us forward. And reduced car journeys is one of the real benefits, I think, of this. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
I think not only reduced car journeys, this is a great question, it really is. And I think it's a question of how can we all help each other. I mean, that quote of Churchill in the opening of his VE Day speech that I quoted from, we must all help each other. And I think particularly the elderly, if we could do some more group shopping schemes to prevent them having to go shopping, reduced car usage, reduced journeys of all sorts in businesses and elsewhere due to using modern technology. I'm hopeful that actually, in terms of the environment, we will be able to make this coronavirus might be the silver lining for the environment. We might be able to actually alter our behaviour in all sorts of ways.
Before we go back to the videos, would you like to, because you always say I have the last word, it's probably better if you do. You've got some themes for future live streaming sessions, and I wondered if you'd like to tell our viewers what those kinds of themes are. I mean, obviously we've had a good run at the health issue last week, education. We can only scratch the surface, but we've started that dialogue, and you feel very strongly that theming these sessions and having questions is a good way of going forward, rather than just having questions coming from all sorts of different directions. But can you just share your thoughts on future themes for these sessions?
So next Friday, the one thing that none of us can do without is food of one form or another. So we will be concentrating next Friday on farming and food, and we would welcome any suggestions you may have during the week as to who we might have on or what themes we might follow. We've got lots of ideas of our own, but I think it's very important that we do feature our farming sector. It's very important in the Cotswolds. We will be having, I hope, a senior manager of a supermarket locally who can tell us exactly whether his shop, his supermarket has profited, what it's been like dealing with the huge demand, not having enough loo paper, all these sorts of things we will be dealing with next Friday. So do tune in, and then after that we're open to suggestions for themes, but there are no doubt important themes that will emerge, and we will take those up. I am particularly keen to do something on volunteering and the vulnerable, so maybe the following Friday, that's the theme for then. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this panel session. I thought it was fascinating, and I thought some very interesting ideas and comments and from the experience of those really caring teachers came through, so thank you.
Okay, and we're now just conscious of the time, and obviously it is VE 75 Day. We have got 3 really good videos that we'd like to end on. The first is our undergraduates who have real issues looking at being able to sit their finals and looking at job opportunities, which was touched on by our panel, but we'd very much like to show that. And then our usual reports on the North and the South, particularly the North, because obviously Councillor Moore is the portfolio holder for the environment, and he will be giving a detailed update on the HRCs, building on what you've already said. And no less important, Councillor Norris, who's got an abiding interest in looking after and developing young children's sporting capabilities, both here and in the twinned town in France that Tetbury is twinned with. So those 3 videos, we're going to go straight to those 3 videos. And thank you, Sir Geoffrey, for your time again today. And see everybody next week.
Thank you, David. Thank you for all at the barn.
Hello, I'm Mike Saunders. I'm a local councillor in the Cotswolds. I'm going to be talking to students to find out how they're being affected by coronavirus. I'm going to be joined by Charlotte Atkins, who is a first-year student at Portsmouth University, studying international relations and Chinese. And I'm going to be joined by Harry Coots, who's a student at the Royal Agricultural University, who is hopefully just about to graduate his course in farm management. Thank you very much for joining us on this fine VE Day morning. We're just going to talk about your experiences at university, as you're both students, but coming from different times in your educational experience, with Charlotte just finishing her first year and Harry just about to graduate. So, Charlotte, how are you finding things?
Yeah, it's been not what I expected for first year, to be honest. I'm now living out of my student accommodation. I returned home, and my course got cut short and everything's online now. So it's a bit crazy.
So we'll sum up as not quite ideal.
Not quite.
Harry, how are you finding things?
It's very strange time actually. The same sort of thing. Course has been cut short now, so everything's online. So managing to do everything online, but it's just not quite the same as being at uni, really.
So it's had quite an effect on both of your studies. Charlotte, how do you think this is affecting your studies so far?
I think transferring it online was a bumpy process, getting lecturers and students to all be able to tap into the same sort of apps. We tried different ways of doing it, and I think it's been very hard for students and teachers alike. The one thing I would say is that my course, I study Chinese, and that has been the most difficult part of it, in the sense that it requires a lot of face-to-face connection with a teacher in order to, be able to learn effectively and get checked on your work. And removal of that face-to-face teaching has been difficult.
Harry?
Well, similar sort of thing, really. Being an agricultural course, a lot of the content involves around going to other farms. It involves a lot of face-to-face contact with other farmers to hear how they're doing things on their estates. So it's not quite the same having to do everything online now, because only a certain amount of benefit that you get from that. It's not quite the same as actually going to a farm, talking to the farmer, and learning things that way.
And what's interesting is both of your courses are quite hands-on. So has there been any communication from your universities about if you are going to go forward from this year, or if you have to do it again?
I'm lucky that I've been told that I will get to second year. We've been given no detriment policy by my university, which means that I can't lose out based on this outbreak. The one thing that I think my course is worried about, I'm supposed to do a placement year abroad in third year, and it doesn't look like that might be happening anymore because of they think the lasting effects of this pandemic.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Charlotte. Harry, what do you have to think about that?
Well, I mean, my university, we're very lucky as well, because they're also doing a no detriment policy. So as long as we get above a certain percentage, then of course the average from all the previous terms, or the previous term this winter, will be combined. So we don't suffer detriment basically for this term. So hopefully we won't be too badly affected from it, but it's not just academics as well. It's also the fact that you're missing out on getting to know more people, building your contact base, which for the last 3 months is quite important to make sure that we, move on with a new job.
Do you think lines of communication, Charlotte, particularly around your financial situation with your student loans and your accommodation, was that clear to start off with? And then I suppose moving on to a more broader question is, how are you managing?
So my big concern was accommodation costs. So my student loan doesn't cover the whole of my accommodation costs. And considering I've had to stop working because of the coronavirus, it means I don't get that additional income that I'd usually get to help cover that. And I wasn't living in my accommodation, so it was a big stress for a while. I'm lucky that my accommodation have now released me from my contract, so that student loan, that last third instalment, will carry me through till September, and hopefully I'll be fine with that. But that was my initial problem, and it was a worry for a good month and a bit.
And do you feel reassured now?
Yes, it's much better. When I got that email through, I was very, very happy.
That's good to know. Harry, how have you been finding things with your accommodation?
Well, I've been quite lucky really, because my landlords are a very nice couple, and they've given me I'm not released from my contract. I'm still going to pay my rent, but not as much as I would have done otherwise. But it's still not very helpful. I mean, luckily my student loan will cover the costs of it, but just the same, I've still got to pay the student loan back at the end of the day, and it's still about 1,500 quid that would have been spent on much more important things otherwise, rather than accommodation that I'm not going to need.
Yeah. And as I understand, Harry, you're at home right now, and you have been home for some time?
I've been home since the start of March. I had to go back. I'm staying on the family farm at the moment because I had to help look after the lambs for lambing season. So I've been pretty much working on the farm for a couple of months now, and I think with lockdown, I'm sort of stuck here now.
So this is pretty much how your educational journey at university ends?
It is pretty much, yes. I mean, I'm hoping that there will be some sort of like a graduation ceremony when it's all over, perhaps even if it's in the autumn term. But to all intents and purposes, this is it now.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed that you get your graduation that you've worked so hard for, Harry.
I think so.
Charlotte, I suppose what I would pretty much like to know from you is, because as a first year student, you've spent your first year in halls, and then there's the question of, do you stay in halls or do you find a house, shared accommodation outside with friends or people on your course? How have you found the coronavirus has affected how you approach setting that up between your first and second years?
So I got into a contract before the coronavirus outbreak for next year. My start date was September. My initial plan was at the start of July, I was to move home, keep my stuff in storage, and then move it into my new accommodation 1st of September. The issue we've got now is I don't know how long this is going to last and sort of what after effects there are going to be. My landlord has been very good in answering my questions in regards to, where do I stand in regards to my contract if my uni year doesn't go ahead next year or if it's all online. There's a great deal of uncertainty, and I believe that setting up my contract, I had no worries that I'd ever have to leave that contract, and I think that's the big thing for all these students when trying to negotiate with landlords, is that nobody could have seen this happening. So we didn't add a clause in the contract for virus outbreaks or whatever, and it was never a consideration. I've already signed away for next year, but I know that I've already paid my deposit and I start paying in August. So it is a big consideration for me of how I'm going to manage that. And I think the stress that's coming towards students at the moment, and then our lectures being online, it feels kind of, you have this dream of going to university and going to lectures and living in your own place, and now most of us are living back with our parents and studying online. It's hard. It's been difficult to deal with.
So you mentioned online studying. Now, has your university given you absolute certainty about how your educational course for next year looks?
We haven't received any information about next year yet.
So we're in May now, and your university haven't confirmed that when you attend university in September, so that's 4 months away, whether that will be online or classroom based.
Until they're waiting, I think, for further confirmation from other sources, but they haven't given us an answer now.
Well, it's a time of flux for both ends of the academia, whether you're starting a course or if you're nearly completed. Harry, I want to wish you all the best for finding your path in your future career, and I do hope you get your graduation. And Charlotte, thank you very much for taking part in this today, and I hope that those opportunities that you need for your CV for in a few years' time when you are ready to graduate are available to you. Thank you very much for participating today, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome again our regular guest, Councillor Nigel Moore, County Councillor and Cabinet Member for the Environment and Planning, and he represents Cotswold Stowe Division. And as you know, he's been a regular contributor to our programme. You weren't very well last week, Nigel. Are you feeling better?
Yeah, I am, David. I'm really grateful to my GP, actually, because I spoke to him, had a telephone appointment earlier in the week, and he then diagnosed what I needed, and he arranged the prescription literally within minutes. So I was able to go down to the surgery that afternoon to collect the prescription. It was very impressive, actually, the way our GP the practice has really evolved in order to deal with this current situation.
Yeah, we heard that last week on our Question Time programme, where GPs were saying that's almost the way forward. Why do you need to go down to the surgery when you can do it virtually? So that's good to hear. You look a lot better. So it's good to see you.
Yeah, I feel a lot better.
And I gather you're going to be giving us some exciting and encouraging news about the waste service in general and the household recycling centres. So really looking forward to your update. Can I hand over to you for you to give that update?
Yes, David, thank you. This past week, I and officers at GCC have been working really hard in order that we can reopen the first two of the HRC sites. That's at Hempstead in Gloucester, and then also the site close to Cheltenham. So those will be reopening on Monday. We are in a different world from what we're used to, I know it's become a cliche, but it's particularly opposite in this case, because the entry to the sites will only be by booking. So I've looked at the booking system, it's up and running, working well. So people need to book their visit. The other thing is that government advice is that people should only take waste to these sites if it's really necessary. So again, as so much during this crisis, we are relying on people's good behaviour, relying on them being responsible in terms of what they need to take to the site. Also, at the site, of course, there's going to be very strict rules about social distancing to ensure that the 2 metre distance, people will not be able to get any help to load into the bins. And so if they do require some help, then they need to take a passenger with them. But again, we'd only ask people bring passengers if they really have to. So there will be a series of restrictions in place to ensure the safety of our staff and also the safety of the public. But as I say, people can book a time slot. The booking system is working really well. So in a sense, like so much else, there's an innovation that we've brought about because of the crisis. And I would think we'd continue with the booking system because going forward, it will make it much easier to manage these sites because they become very popular, particularly at bank holidays and at the weekends.
What about the other sites? Are these two operating on a trial basis? What about Foss Cross, for example?
Yes, they're operating on a trial basis. They're the two largest sites. So during the course of this next week, we'll gain a lot of useful experience on how the sites are working. We've recruited one of the leading event management companies in the country who do a lot of the big sporting events. We're using that company to help us manage the traffic so we can get that traffic managed and people are comfortable about approaching the sites. So we're looking to open, this is what I'm sure your listeners are wanting to hear, we're looking to open Foss Cross on the 18th, and that's obviously subject to the tests we're doing this week, but that's our target, to open Foss Cross on the 18th of May with a similar booking regime, with a similar restrictions on the way the site's being used.
That's good to hear. What's the situation? Because you've heard recently, and I think you're one of the people responsible for trying to help get the green waste in Cotswolds, the green waste collection service, back up and running. What's the situation with green waste and going up to the HRCs?
Well, basically, we know that at last CDC have agreed to reopen the garden waste service from this coming Wednesday, although, of course, it's going to be staggered across the whole of the district. I understand in Blockley we will not be getting a collection until the 25th of May. But I want to thank Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown for his help in getting that service restarted, because I wouldn't want to reopen the HRC sites if there was no garden waste collection service operating, because what we don't want is the HRC sites to be overwhelmed with garden waste. I mean, for example, we haven't had that problem in Cheltenham or Gloucester, which is why we've been able to open the sites there on Monday. So without that taking place, it would have been very difficult to reopen the Foss Cross site in a week's time.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our viewers on updates from the north?
Not at the moment, David. Cotswold. Before I go on to Cotswold Friends, just to say, I think we all need to thank the staff right across the county in terms of waste collection and waste recycling. They've kept that service running all the way through. I mean, I can remember a couple of years ago when there was a waste strike in Birmingham, and we saw on the television in Birmingham piles of waste and rubbish everywhere. We would not have wanted that during this crisis. It hasn't happened, and I think we really need to thank the staff for what they've done. Just quickly, Cotswold Friends continuing to do a superb job in the North Cotswolds in terms of helping people get to GP visits, to hospital visits, and also ensuring that the more vulnerable have got their shopping.
That's really good to hear. And I'm just picking up on your point about guys working in the waste service. We often forget that guys who are collecting and disposing of our refuse are frontline workers, and we should be very grateful to them for the risks they're taking. I know in our village we actually applaud the waste guys when they come through, and they love that, the fact that people do appreciate what they're doing. So can I thank you for all your efforts looking after the environment and getting the service restarted. And we get a sense down here that we're turning the corner on coronavirus, but as you say, we've still got to stay safe and make sure we look after ourselves and take all the necessary precautions. And can I wish you a happy VE75 day, and look forward to seeing I look forward to seeing you next week.
I love your Union Jack on the table. Well done.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Bye.
All the best, David.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Tetbury is fortunate to have a large number of organisations that make a real difference to children's lives. I have been in contact with a number of these groups, keen to find out how the current situation has impacted them. The short messages that follow from a handful of these groups will help explain some of the challenges and difficulties they now face.
Hi, I'm Claire Williams, the current Secretary and Treasurer for Tetbury Town Football Club. We offer football to 4 to 16-year-olds across 14 teams in 4 leagues. We have over 200 players on our books currently. When the news of COVID-19 got released, we took advice from the FA and Public Health England to cease playing football. And the impact of this has been that we haven't been able to finish our fixtures, enter any summer competitions, as well as celebrate the successes of our players and the club over the last season. We operate across 3 sites, the recreational ground, Preston Park and Sir William Romney playing fields, and we have to maintain these sites, so with no income coming in, this is providing a challenge. I'm in the process of looking at Sport England to see what they can provide. We have a short-term plan. We are already registering our teams to leagues for 2021. We are preparing and renewing some of our kits, and we are ensuring our coaches are up to date with their qualifications. We invested a lot of money in equipment and portable lighting this year, so planning that ahead is been very important. From a COVID-19 point of view, coaches are still in communication via their WhatsApp groups to parents and sending video challenges, etc., to continue the development of skills and also to support those players emotionally to know that they are still part of the football club even though we are going through this challenging time. We are awaiting advice from Public Health England and the government to what the next steps are from a football perspective. Our key aim from a club is to provide a safe and enjoyable space for children and youth to play football, supporting their health and well-being. We are looking forward to seeing everyone once these restrictions have been lifted, and I send my thanks from myself, the committee and all the coaches. Stay well and keep safe. Many thanks.
I'm Caroline, I'm part of Girl Guiding Tetbury. I've been a Brownies and a Rainbows leader for a little over 5 years. As an organisation in Tetbury, we usually run weekly Rainbows, Brownies and Guide meetings for over 80 girls aged between 5 and 14. We provide a safe space for girls to develop new skills, independence, decision making, teamwork in a fun, friendly environment. Our meetings obviously had to stop quite abruptly in March, and although we celebrated our centenary with a big tea party in February, we're very disappointed not to be able to continue our celebrations. We had a trip to Legoland for the girls planned, and also a camp for the whole district. Some of our units are trying to keep in touch with their girls through social media, Zoom, Facebook, etc. And some girls are still working on badges from our programme. Girl Guiding UK has provided some extra resources for girls to access remotely and guidance on running virtual meetings for volunteers who feel able to do so. They're also running their own survey for girls to share their experiences and the impact on them of COVID-19. For the future, we're worried that we'll lose young members as they will have lost the momentum of coming out to weekly meetings. And we're also concerned once we do get back to some sort of normality, we won't have enough volunteers able or willing to run our units. Financially, we're concerned as we're a non-profit organisation and keep our fees to a minimum to allow access for all. We would be uncomfortable charging parents subs for this summer term and possibly longer because we've not been able to provide what we normally provide. We also still have to pay at least the same to our national organisation next February when our annual membership fee is charged.
Evening guys, Ryan here from Tetbury Cricket Club. Hope you're well. So how has COVID-19 impacted both our club and recreational cricket? Well, it's been a massive challenge. We've really had to come to terms with some major changes, particularly with regards to the start of our season. So as many of you will be aware, professional cricket has been suspended up until the start of July, very likely for that to be extended beyond July into August, September, and that applies to recreational cricket as well. So there's a real chance we may not get any cricket in this summer, which is a real shame because 2019 was the pinnacle in terms of the Ashes, the World Cup success, and everything was built in terms of a strategy from the ECB to help generate further participation in the sport in 2020 and beyond. But with regards to what does that mean for grassroots cricket, what does that mean for Tetbury Cricket Club and the leagues that we participate in, obviously we follow government good guidelines and advice, right? So we will not be playing until at least the start of July, but more than likely no summer cricket at all. But how does that both impact us in the short, medium and longer term, and what are our plans to help address some of that? So 2020 was actually going to be our biggest year from a club perspective. We'd grown our adult section from 2 teams to 3 teams. From a youth perspective, we'd grown from having girls teams at under 11 at under 13 level through to a full commitment of both junior boys and junior girls at the same age groups, under 9s, under 11s and under 13s. So for us it was a mega year and a big chance to push on, develop our youth and then build that pipeline and roadmap or pathway for younger players into the senior teams. So we don't have that luxury right now. With a lot of the junior cricket that's played between May and July, so we will miss all of that season in effect, so we will miss that cohort of players. But rather than worry about that and worry about the winter programme that was we had to cease early and worry about the festivals that we won't take part in, there's a big drive to continue to engage both our members and players and family and friends as well. So as a collective, what we've been looking to do as coaches is to continue to push out content to our younger players probably twice a week, and that's in the form of videos, in the form of audio tapes, and it just allows them to take part in some of those basic skills, basic drills that we would do in any of our training sessions. So whilst we're socially distanced and we have to have physical restrictions in place, of course we can continue to do stuff digitally, and that's where we're seeing a lot of our development work. There's lots of great things to be associated with. Things like our All-Stars programme and our Dynamos programmes, they will get replanned, whether that's 2020 or 2021. We will be here. The club's not going anywhere, and we will find funding, we will find support from both the governing body, the ECB, as well as the local organisation, the GCB, and the leagues that we participate in, the GCCL, STCA, etc. So we will be here. That's the question. That's the thing we want to let our members know, let the wider public know, that we will still be here to support them, to support new members, as and when government legislation allows us to get back into things. Okay, so stay with us. The club will still continue to exist. We are very much looking forward to having you guys back, enjoying what we have down the recreation ground and beyond. Okay, so stay with us, stay safe, and we will be there when you need us. Take care.
A message from Tetbury and District Twinning Association. At difficult times like these, and particularly when we're cut off from our normal daily routine, it's natural for our thoughts to turn to our friends, family and loved ones. And recently, the Tetbury Twinning Association has found itself thinking about our twin town of Châtillon-sur-Indre in France. We had been planning to have a visit from them to be hosted in Tetbury in August of this year. Plans were well underway, and we had a raft of interesting and exciting historical and cultural things for them to do. Sadly, we're not going to be able to do that. Guys, it's a rain check, not a cancellation. We look forward to reconvening, hopefully in 2021. It's also made me think a little bit about twinning and what it potentially means when the pandemic ends. In the decades since modern twinning was established, the world has mysteriously become smaller. Fast transport links, almost instantaneous communication, disposable income and more free time for travelling has meant that people have established connections, both personal and within their towns, across Europe and across the world. Sadly, in recent weeks, the world has become larger again. We have all become isolated in lockdowns within our communities, towns, cities, and even our countries. We must remember that when this is over, the connections remain there, and it is our job as a world, but twinning has a major part to play in this, to shrink the globe again, make the world smaller, re-establish our bonds of friendship, and move forward together in the spirit of modern twinning. Châtillon, we're thinking of you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Hey my friends! We will miss seeing you this year and look forward to when we can meet again.
The European days are a great moment for exchange and conviviality.
We hope to see you again! We love